Hey Nerd Gang, Chase here with another weekly episode. Today's topic is neither lore or science, but rather it pertains directly to the industry and writing in general. I recently spoke with someone who didn't read sci-fi, because they didn't think they were smart enough to understand all the physics and such in hard sci-fi, and they only sometimes read soft sci-fi. So I'm discussing the difference between soft and hard science fiction, and why you don't need to be an engineer or hold a doctorate in applied physics to illustrate my explanation of this. As you can see, I'm playing the free-to-play game War Thunder. Hooray! In this case, I use War Thunder because it has separate realistic and arcade modes that make a decent analogy for the difference I'm discussing. I'll start with a realistic game mode as I talk about hard sci-fi. Before I do, let me talk a bit about War Thunder, because everybody loves War Thunder. Note the sarcasm. I'm going to quote a much larger YouTuber than me, Fly Daily, and say that War Thunder is almost fun. War Thunder is not new, and I've been playing it off and on since tanks were new, much less the half-dozen new factions and ships and helicopters and newer generations of vehicles, and there's a boatload of different vehicles here. And it's really grindy, and unless you spend lots of real money, you can't really win or have fun. But it is technically free to play. And one of the main reasons I play this game, and on occasion come back to it, is for the specific aircraft I'm flying now, the IL-2 Stromovic, which is Russian, it translates to flying tank. It is one of my favorite aircraft of all time. Now, bear with me on this tangent for a moment, because I was an aviation nerd before I was a sci-fi nerd, and I'm still an aircraft mechanic for my day job, because I haven't sold enough books yet. Anyway, the Stromovic was a World War II Soviet equivalent of the A-10, slow, tough ground pounder with big cannons. The reason it was so remarkable, in my opinion, is that the inner wings and fuselage is much like its tracked name. It's armor. The structure is armor. It's an armored airplane. They took a big block of metal and carved a trough out of it like a dugout canoe, and they put wings and guns on it and used it to blow stuff up. How Soviet is that? Stalin himself said that the aircraft was the bread and butter of the Soviet Army/Air Force, or whatever it was they were called back then. Anyway, the IL-2 was responsible for the destruction of lots of the Reich's ground vehicles, and they would often do additional, mock gun runs after they'd run out of ammo, because they were so feared by the troops on the ground that, as everyone's cowering in terror because, the Stromovics are coming, and that was enough to turn the tide of the battle. The windshields, as you've probably seen, are very thick, bulletproof glass, and they were very tough aircraft. There's many tales of IL-2s taking direct hits from AAA emplacements and soldiering on anyway. They could just absorb and deal all kinds of punishment. The Stromovic was so serious a problem for the Germans, they had specific attack strategies for dealing with them, which was mainly for fighters, such as, the Bf-109, to attack from above and aim for the cockpit and either kill the pilot or puncture the large oil tank situated immediately behind the pilot's seat. And this is the reason why later models, later than the one I'm flying, were modified to carry a gunner who sat behind the large oil tank and had a dorsal-mounted Scotch machine gun, which was in itself an excellent weapon and an interesting bit of Soviet engineering, and I'll save that lesson for another time. This is already going to be a long tangent. All this talk about stuff, about armor and the Germans attacking from above and all that's relevant. I have a story to tell, because I can't talk about Russians without talking about crazy Russians. An IL-2 was hit from above, and the gunner was killed and the oil tank was punctured, but the pilot wasn't hurt. But the engine's out of oil, and an engine without oil isn't going to last very long, and the pilot knew this. So he quickly and relatively safely landed his plane in a farm field, a gear-up crash landing that he walked away from. And in all honesty, with a new oil tank and propeller, the whole plane was probably salvageable. But that's not important for the story. The Russian pilot was hiding in a barn or something close by to where he crash landed. And he saw, now here's the wild part. The German that shot his Stromovic down comes along, lands his BF-109 in the same field, and starts going through the crashed airplane looking for souvenirs. So while the German's rooting around, the crazy Russian runs out of the barn or wherever he was hiding, jumps in the German airplane, and takes off. He steals the pilot's BF-109, leaving him stranded who knows where in the Russian countryside. And not only that, but the Russian pilot manages to dodge all the friendly fighter patrols on his way back, returns to his own airbase, and lands the German fighter there. Now that guy's got some hangers on him, don't he? I don't remember the names or the dates involved, so I'll do some looking and see if I can find a reference for the story. But anyway, now that the story's over and I've told you about this cool airplane, let me get back to the topic at hand. A realistic mode in War Thunder is kind of like hard sci-fi. For hard sci-fi sticks to strict rules. It doesn't break physics. It doesn't have faster than light travel or other crazy stuff like that. Or at least, as you know, we're currently limited by our understanding of physics and the universe. So by definition, hard sci-fi is more realistic, more plausible, it's slower and more methodical and controlled by rules. The real rules that Einstein defined, the laws of gravitation and orbital mechanics and physics and all that stuff. That's not to say the story is going to be slow or boring. A competent writer can make just about anything exciting. In hard sci-fi, it just means that as the writer, you are limited to the possibilities that could actually happen, and sometimes being limited in such a manner can actually make things more exciting, adding another layer of suspense. Will the intrepid crew and their crippled spaceship be able to escape the star's gravity, or will they get sucked into the very hot white dwarf and get burned to a crisp? And so on. It is a bit more challenging to the author of the book. They'll have to double check what they're writing, make sure it's within the realm of possibilities and such, do math. Lots of fun. However, and this is the root of my confusion and the reason I'm making this video, why does that matter to the reader? The reader doesn't need to do math and calculate orbits and burn times and specific impulse and such. The reader needs only to accept what the writer has to put into words at face value and enjoy the show. The reader needs only to geek.
A little more effort and victory will be ours.
And, you know, the reader doesn't need to be a geek and only needs to enjoy, you know, the suspense of the damaged ship struggling to escape the star's gravity. They don't necessarily need to know whether the physics allows them to go that fast or accelerate that hard without the crew's brains being liquefied inside their skulls by the G-forces, and so on. So, much like me piloting this virtual plane, I have to be more methodical in what I'm doing, like I do when I'm writing, because it's limited by rules, by real-world possibilities and physics. However, for you as the audience, and the readers, the watchers, you don't need to know all that. All you see is a plane and rockets and machine guns, and strictly speaking, you don't need to know what can and can't happen. You just enjoy the show, take in the scene. So why not enjoy it? Why not watch a good dogfight or read a good sci-fi? You dig? You feel me?
Returning to the base!
I mean, what's it matter if the reader knows it's possible or not, so long as they enjoy it? There's no need to consult your physics professor or what have you if you don't want to. But if you're as big of a nerd as I am and you want to, you can, and it adds a whole extra layer of enjoyment and contemplation to the experience, and I mean both in the literature and in the video games. Take what you want, enjoy what you like, and no one is making you dig deeper than you want to. You know? I don't see why you can't. I see no reason why you can't enjoy hard sci-fi, regardless of your knowledge of science and physics and space travel and so on. Anyway, I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. My payload is spent, and I've got to get this tub home before the fight's over, and those couple enemy fighters over there managed to catch up with me. So I'm going to cut ahead to the arcade mode and talk about soft science fiction. Alright. So, soft sci-fi, as the name implies, doesn't so strictly adhere to the laws of physics, and in my opinion is the subgenre that bridges the gap between fantasy and science fiction. Anything is possible, after all, and the writer can write whatever the writer wants. I recently read a sci-fi book where the aliens have a space station in orbit over Earth. And by having a lower orbital altitude than the other satellites, means they were able to hide inside the atmosphere and hide. So that the humans didn't know the aliens were there. And their space station was undetected. And, it's... in real world, it's completely ridiculous. Because, being lower than the other satellites, means that they were inside the atmosphere. And by necessity, that the orbital altitude, would have, because of the lower orbital altitude, the orbital speed would have been much faster. And made them even easier to detect. And that's not to mention how utterly ridiculous such a feat would be, that kind of speed at those low of altitudes and ungodly amounts of heat just from atmospheric friction. Heck, it might not be enough to turn your stealthy space station into an orbital ball of plasma, and then you've got no space station at all. But that's not the point. The point is, the author wrote it because that's what they wanted, and the people are buying. Just like arcade mode here in War Thunder, anything is possible, and it's going to be wild and crazy and disorganized and messy. In War Thunder, in arcade mode, you magically get more bombs and bullets after a few seconds without having to land, and your plane doesn't break when you dive at too high of speed or pull too many G's, and everything goes faster and it doesn't stall and it's downright silly. It's still almost fun, and probably more fun to watch for people who don't know much about airplanes. Both types are equally valid, and to the casual observer, can be equally entertaining. And why this person felt you couldn't read hard sci-fi because they didn't feel they were smart enough is beyond me. And I can understand how people, myself included, scoff at these less realistic portrayals, whether it be cheesy sci-fi or silly video games. Okay, get me shot down here. Here, as you can see, in this, almighty, nonsensical, every man for himself furball, it's much like that. There's no rules, it's just fast and messy, and you even get respawns now, because everyone is going to get shot up here, and there's no order to it at all. And while I understand why some find it more enjoyable to watch, or play that way, or read, it drives me nuts. Because it's not real. It couldn't actually happen like that. But just because I'm a snob about it doesn't mean anyone else has to be. And I see no reason why anyone can't enjoy both. I don't need more or special education to enjoy hard sci-fi or soft sci-fi or hard games or easy games. But I'm just some guy on the internet playing video games, and you don't have to listen to me. Though I appreciate the time and the attention to those that do. And if you're willing to spare me more of your precious time, consider looking at my book or my blog. The links will be down in the video description, along with that link for the story I mentioned earlier about the Russian guy stealing the German plane. I guess the point of this whole tirade is just to illustrate that you can and should enjoy whatever books you like, and there's no reason to let your opinions be filtered or reduced. And you should read whatever you want, be it hard sci-fi, fantasy, horror, or even romance, provided you can read. I see no reason why you can't partake in all of these things, so long as you are literate. And as a final plug before I wrap up, because, I think I've made my point. This video is almost finished, and I'm going to get my butt shot off some more. I'd like to offer my book, The Descendant, to any and all sci-fi fans, because it's something of a middle ground between hard and soft sci-fi. To be completely honest, I wish it was harder. But I get excited writing, and I just go. And I'm too often lacking in the time, energy, knowledge, motivation, or some combination thereof to follow up on some of the things that I should have. To, confirm or validate my... Really? You gotta ram me? Come on, bro. To confirm or validate some of my feelings and the science inside my science fiction. So, maybe my books can bridge the gap and find enjoyment and space on the shelves of people in both camps. Thanks for listening to me. Check out my blog or the book if you like. Like, comment, subscribe to the video, all that fun stuff to drive the algorithm for YouTube, for you and other people to get more content, more of my content, in the future. And thanks for your time. I'll see you in the next one.